The afternoon sun glinted off the hood of Richard Bennett's Aston Martin as he drummed his fingers impatiently against the leather steering wheel. Chicago's downtown traffic had come to its usual standstill, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the car's powerful air conditioning. His phone buzzed with another message from the board. Third quarter projections needed revision again. Richard swiped it away with a flick of his thumb, his attention suddenly caught by movement on the sidewalk. His heart stopped. Under a faded blue umbrella attached to a rusted cart, a woman with her hair tucked under a worn scarf arranged candy bars on a makeshift display. But it wasn't her that made Richard's breath catch in his throat. It was the three small boys. Beside her, each holding trays of candy, approaching stopped cars with practiced politeness. All three had the same striking eyes, the same jawline, his jawline, the same sandy brown hair that he saw in childhood photos of himself. The light changed, but Richard didn't move. Horns blared behind him. He stared, unblinking, as the boys approached another car to offer their merchandise. Their voices were soft, respectful, rehearsed, the tone he remembered using himself when asking for help without sounding desperate. With trembling hands, he threw the car into park, ignoring the chorus of angry honks. "Wait!" he shouted, stepping out into the heat and chaos, his Italian leather shoes hitting the pavement with unusual urgency. He didn't care about the expensive suit now wrinkling in the humidity or the meeting he was already late for. Everything in his carefully controlled world had just shattered. It was her, Olivia. 6 years ago, he'd walked away from her with nothing but a hastily written note and grand ambitions. "I can't stay," it had read. He'd convinced himself she would understand, that he had no choice, that once he built his empire, he would return for her. But success came, guilt faded, and she vanished from his thoughts, until now. She turned at the sound of his voice, slow and wary. The tray in her hands trembled slightly. Her eyes, wider now, more guarded, exhausted, met his across the distance that felt both 6 years and 6 inches wide. "Olivia," she said nothing, just nodded to the boys. "Back to the cart," she instructed quietly. They obeyed immediately, their curious eyes darting between her and the strange man in expensive clothes. "They're mine, aren't they?" Richard asked, his voice barely audible above the street noise. "Those boys, they're my sons." Olivia's jaw tightened. She looked down at her worn sneakers, then at the boys, then at the bustling street, anywhere but at him. "You should go," she said. "This isn't your world anymore." "I didn't know if I had—" "You didn't ask." Her voice was quiet but razor-sharp. "You didn't even look back." He had no defense, only the hollow echo of his own blind ambition. "Let me help," he pleaded. "Not for me, for them." She hesitated, then handed one of the boys a crumpled dollar bill. "Get water for your brothers, Tommy." When they moved away, she turned back to Richard. "I work 3 jobs. I sell candy, so they can eat decent meals. You think throwing money at us fixes what you broke?" "No," he whispered, "but let me try to make it right." Later that evening, Richard sat in his penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, staring at a photo of the boys he'd managed to take discreetly. Their faces haunted him, 3 identical pairs of eyes, his eyes looking back at the camera with a mixture of curiosity and wariness beyond their years. He called his assistant. "Find everything on Olivia Martinez, where she lives, where the kids go to school, everything." It took a week of sleepless nights. Richard couldn't focus in meetings, couldn't taste his food, couldn't hear conversations. Around him, he began driving through their neighborhood, a weathered apartment complex with faded paint, a perpetually out-of-service elevator, and laundry hanging from balcony railings. From his car, he watched them return home each evening. The boys always walked in a perfect line, holding hands, with Tommy in front, protectively leading his brothers. If you are enjoying the story, type 5 in the comments and subscribe for more videos like this. If not, type 0. It helps me create even better content for you. Continuing. One rainy afternoon, Olivia spotted his car. She didn't seem surprised, just resigned. She approached with slow, deliberate steps, her thin jacket already soaked. "You spying on us now? I just want to talk." "Talk, then leave." He told her everything about the DNA test he'd secretly arranged using a lollipop stick one of the boys had dropped. The results came back. Tommy. He's mine. They're all mine, aren't they? Triplets? She nodded wordlessly. A single tear escaped down her cheek, immediately mixing with the raindrops. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want them to grow up waiting for a father who would never return." That night, Olivia reluctantly allowed him to spend a few hours with his sons. For the first time, they went to a nearby park after the rain cleared, bought ice cream cones that dripped down small fingers, kicked a soccer ball Richard purchased from a street vendor. He observed how Tommy laughed when he stumbled but quickly got up, how Alex became fascinated by a line of ants marching along the sidewalk, how Michael quietly watched over his brothers like a miniature guardian. Richard's heart swelled with pride and ached with regret simultaneously. As they walked back toward Olivia's apartment, Michael looked up at him with those familiar eyes and asked, "Are you going to be our friend now?" The question knocked the wind from Richard's lungs. What could he possibly answer? He managed a smile and said, "I'd like that very much." The boy studied him for a long moment before nodding seriously, as if approving a business proposal. What would happen when they discovered who he really was? What would Richard do when they asked why he had been absent for 6 years of their lives? The questions haunted him as he drove back to his empty penthouse, the laughter of his sons still echoing in his ears. Will Richard find the courage to reveal his true identity to his sons, or will his past mistakes continue to haunt their fragile new relationship? The ticking clock of truth waits for no one. The following week, Richard arranged for a larger apartment in a better neighborhood, but Olivia refused. "We don't need your charity," she insisted, pride evident in every word despite her circumstances. "It's not charity," he argued. "It's responsibility. My responsibility." 6 years too late, she shot back, but her voice lacked its earlier sharpness. Exhaustion had rounded its edges. Richard observed the dark circles under her eyes, how her clothes hung loosely on her frame. "At least let me help with the boys' education," he pressed. "Better schools, opportunities they deserve." After hours of tense negotiation at a small diner where she nursed a single cup of coffee, Olivia finally agreed to allow Richard to pay for the boys' education and health care, but insisted they would continue living in their current apartment. "I don't want them thinking money solves everything," she explained. Richard recognized the same stubborn determination that had drawn him to her years ago. He began spending evenings and weekends with the boys. Tommy, the boldest, warmed to him first, eagerly showing off his collection of rocks and bottle caps. Alex, the quietest, would watch him with curious, analytical eyes before gradually allowing Richard to help with his drawings. Michael, the natural leader of the three, maintained a polite distance, as if waiting for evidence that Richard wouldn't disappear again. As days turned to weeks, Richard's morning routine altered dramatically. Board meetings and investor calls were now scheduled around school drop-offs. His executive assistant learned to hold his calls during the evening hours when he helped with homework. His sleek bachelor pad gradually accumulated children's books, small sneakers by the door, and refrigerator artwork. But just as his heart began to hope for redemption, everything collapsed around him. Victoria, his fiancée and business partner, discovered the truth. She stormed into his office one afternoon, tablet in hand, showing photos taken by a private investigator. "Care to explain this little family outing?" she demanded, her voice arctic. The screen showed Richard pushing 3 identical boys on swings, laughing. "I can explain," he began, but there was nothing to explain. The truth was evident in the matching faces of the boys. "Fix this," Victoria hissed, "or I will. These complications, they're not part of our plan." Their plan? The merger that would make TechForge the largest tech consultancy firm in the Midwest, with Victoria's family connections providing the final puzzle piece. The merger that required Richard's pristine reputation and undivided attention. "They're my sons," he said simply. "Leave them," she countered, "or I will destroy everything you've built." And she did. Within weeks, Richard found himself fighting for his company's survival. Victoria's family pulled their backing. Board members received anonymous tips about ethical concerns. Headlines emerged questioning the stability of a CEO who concealed a secret family. Investors grew nervous. Stock prices wavered. Richard stood at a crossroads, abandon Olivia and the boys again, or watch his empire crumble. Through sleepless nights and endless strategy sessions with his legal team, one thought kept returning. The look on Tommy's face when Richard had taught him to throw a baseball. The way Alex had fallen asleep against his shoulder during a movie. How Michael had finally trusted him enough to ask for help with a difficult math problem. When confronted with the decision as a younger man, Richard had chosen ambition. Now, older and perhaps wiser, he faced the same choice with different eyes. His lawyer laid out the options bluntly. Fight this and risk losing everything, or distance yourself from the situation. Until after the merger. Have you ever had to choose between success and family? Or do you know someone who has faced a similar, impossible choice? Let me know in the comments below. Richard stared out his office window at the Chicago skyline. He had conquered. What was it all worth? The question echoed in his mind as he made the hardest phone call of his life, not to Olivia, but to his executive board. "I'm stepping down as CEO," he announced, his voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside him. The stunned silence on the other end of the line was broken only by someone's shocked intake of breath. "Effective immediately." That evening, he drove to Olivia's apartment with no plan beyond showing up. She opened the door, took one look at his face, and somehow knew. "You chose," she said simply. "I did," he nodded. "I chose them. I chose us, if there can be an us again." The transformation wasn't instantaneous or easy. Richard sold his controlling interest in TechForge, keeping enough shares to provide security but relinquishing day-to-day control. He moved into a modest house in a family neighborhood, close enough for the boys to stay in their school with their friends, but far from the neglected apartment building. He traded board meetings for parent-teacher conferences, business dinners, for family game nights. Olivia watched his metamorphosis with cautious eyes. "How do I know you won't leave again when this gets too real, when it's not exciting anymore?" she asked one night as they sat on the porch after the boys had gone to bed. "Because I've seen both sides now," Richard answered, "and I know which one matters." Rebuilding trust came in small moments. Richard showing up consistently for soccer, games, remembering which boy liked crusts, cut-off sandwiches, sitting through fever nights, weathering tantrums over homework. The boys began calling him Dad hesitantly at first, then with increasing confidence. Victoria made good on her threats. Richard's professional reputation took hits. Former colleagues crossed the street to avoid him. His phone rang less frequently, but with each month that passed, the sting lessened, replaced by new measures of success. Michael's improved reading scores, Alex's growing confidence, Tommy's infectious laugh. Will Richard's sacrifice be enough to rebuild what was broken, or will his past continue to shadow their future? The true test came 9 months after Richard's world had turned upside down. Tommy came home from school with a bruised cheek and tearful eyes. "What happened?" Richard demanded, kneeling to examine the injury. "Joey Miller said I was a charity case," Tommy explained, his voice small. "He said you're not really our dad. You just feel sorry for us." Richard felt as if he'd been struck. The boys knew he was their father, but they had never discussed the years of absence. Now the moment had arrived without warning or preparation. That night, after consulting with Olivia, Richard sat the boys down. "I need to tell you something. Important," he began, searching for words that wouldn't shatter their newly formed bond. "6 years ago, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I left your mother because I thought success meant making money and being important. I didn't know about you three, but that doesn't excuse what I did." 3 identical pairs of eyes watched him intently. Michael, always the protector, asked, "Are you leaving again?" "No," Richard said firmly. "Never. And I will spend every day trying to make up for the time I missed. Not because I feel sorry for you, but because I love you. Because you're the best parts of me, and I almost lost that forever." Tommy studied his hands. "Is that why you don't live in your big tower anymore?" Richard nodded. "That tower was empty. This home is full." Alex, who rarely spoke unless he had something important to say, looked up. "I'm glad you came back." Those 5 simple words broke something open in Richard's chest, a dam holding back emotions he'd suppressed for months, years. He pulled the boys into a tight embrace, feeling Olivia's hand rest gently on his shoulder. The following spring brought unexpected news. Richard's former company was struggling under Victoria's leadership. Investors approached Richard about returning, not as CEO, but as a consultant to help stabilize the business he'd built. The offer came with prestige, power, and a substantial paycheck. Standing in the kitchen of their modest home, watching, Olivia helped the boys with a science project sprawled across the table. Richard knew his answer before even considering it. Some things, once given up, were worth the sacrifice. Others, once found, were irreplaceable. "Dad," Tommy called, "we need you to hold this part." Richard joined his family at the table, helping to construct a solar system model with styrofoam, balls and paint that would inevitably end up on everyone's clothes. Later that night, as he scraped blue paint from under his fingernails, his phone rang with another call from the investors. He silenced it without a second thought. 2 years after that fateful traffic light, Richard sat in a school auditorium, watching Michael recite a poem in the 2nd grade performance. His delivery was perfect, clear, confident, with just the right emphasis on each word. Beside him, Olivia wiped a tear from her cheek. "You stayed," she whispered, her fingers finding his in the darkness. He nodded, blinking away his own tears. "I should have never left." The audience applauded. Children giggled backstage, and for the first time in years, Richard felt complete. Not as a CEO, not as a business titan, but as a father, a partner, a man who had finally discovered what truly mattered. Later that week, he proposed to Olivia, not with an extravagant diamond that would have impressed his former social circle, but with a simple band that had belonged to his grandmother. They married in a small ceremony in the park, where he had first reconnected with his sons, with Michael, Tommy, and Alex serving proudly as best men. Life wasn't perfect. They argued about normal things, schedules, discipline approaches, whose turn it was to do the dishes. Money was sometimes tight, especially with 3 growing boys who seemed to need new shoes every other month. Richard occasionally missed the adrenaline rush of closing big deals, but it paled compared to the joy of closing a good book with 3 sleepy boys tucked against him. On the triplets' 8th birthday, Richard watched them blow out candles on a slightly lopsided homemade cake. His former life seemed like a distant dream, or perhaps a cautionary tale. Sometimes what appears to be the end of your story is merely the beginning of the one that truly matters. Because genuine wealth isn't measured in stock options or corner offices. It's calculated in bedtime stories, scraped knees kissed better, and the weight of a child falling asleep in your arms, trusting you completely. Do you ever regret it? Olivia asked him that night as they cleaned up the last of the birthday celebration. Richard thought about the question carefully. "I regret leaving," he said finally. "I regret missing those first years. But this life?" He gestured to their home, modest but filled with evidence of 3 active boys and 1 reclaimed love. Never. Outside their window, Chicago's skyline glittered with the promise of wealth and power that had once consumed him. Richard turned away from the view, toward the hallway where 3 boys slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that their father would be there in the morning, and all the mornings after. He had paid the price of ambition, and in return, received a treasure beyond measure. Congratulations. Type 9 in the comments so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel.